I'm Shirley Lincoln Lipsey, and I was born on November 21st, 1926. And I was born in Omaha, and we lived on 38th Street, North 38th Street, and
And I'm Jim Lipsey. I'm fortunate enough to be Shirley's husband. And I was born on April 2, 1921. As you can readily see, I was a day late from April Fool's Day. And I was born in Omaha. And let's see.
Tell me about your parents, Jim.
Well, my father was Joe Lipsey, and my mother was Tilly Lipsey. And my father came to this country when he was 2 years old, and my mother came here when she was 16, and they both came from somewhere. I've got the names here in Poland. And at that time, Poland was kind of confused with Russia, and I'm not sure of the history of which country had title to the shtetl they were born in. At any rate, they both came with their parents, and they settled on, I believe, on South 10th Street originally, where there was a colony, a small colony of immigrant Jews.
What brought them to Omaha?
Well, that's interesting. I had an uncle named Ike Abrahamson, and Uncle Ike had come to Omaha. He was considerably older than I, of course, and he was older than my father. And he had come to Omaha as a track worker. I suppose he was something they called a Gandy dancer on the Union Pacific Railroad. And that's how he got to Omaha. And as far as I know, he was the first one of our family clan that came to Omaha. And my understanding is that the rest of the family, my parents and the others of our family, followed him to Omaha. And when I knew him, he had a feed store where he sold hay and grains and so on to people that had horses. And his feed store was on North 24th Street, about something like Izzard, or right around there. And I remember going there and smelling that hay, and I loved it. And I used to love to go in there and take a piece of hay and put it in my mouth, and it tasted good when I was a little kid.
And Shirley, tell me about your parents.
well, Daddy was born in Omaha, and his family lived on about 36th and Leavenworth. And I think Grandpa Lincoln had a grocery store there. And my mother came over from Riga, Latvia. And I think some of the family was already here. And then I think they went into the what do you call it? The meat surveying business. It was commercial. They sold to the hotels and stuff. And anyway, she came over when she was 13. And I remember her telling us the story of being, I think, in the second grade, because she had to learn English. And of course she was a big girl. And she was very embarrassed. But in the end, Mother spoke beautiful English. And she was one of about 9 children. And it was wonderful growing up in Omaha.
Did your mother and father have brothers and sisters that you
Yes,
knew?
they did. Mother came out of a family of, I think, 9, and I think Dad came out of a family of 8. And I really didn't know my grandmother, Lincoln, at all. And of course, I was one of 11 children, and I was in the middle of the family. And by that time, they were old, and of course, life expectancy at that time wasn't long. And anyway, she was gone, and I barely remember my father's father. And then my mother's father, I didn't know at all. And I think I was about 8 or 9 years old when we lost Grandma Simon.
Yeah, but you knew your aunts.
Oh, my aunts, yes.
Aunt Katie.
Oh, yeah, Katie London, and they lived in Council Bluffs. And then...
She was a wonderful character.
Oh, yeah. She had a very heavy accent, and she was just full of life. And I can remember our children were little, and she sort of scared them because she was so...
She came on very strong.
Yeah, yeah. But she was darling.
Yeah.
And then a couple of my other aunts moved away. And then one of my father's brothers was killed during the First World War. And
Well, then your Aunt Ringle, what was her name?
Aunt Petey Ringle.
Yeah, Petey Ringle.
She was adorable. She was the youngest. And then my Aunt Marie, she moved to California, and so did my Aunt Alice. And
Petey's husband, Phil, he had a drugstore, the Hamilton drugstore on 50th and
Hamilton.
And Hamilton. And we used to go there and get clown sundaes.
yeah,
They were out of this world.
yeah.
Jim, tell me a little bit about your parents.
Well, I have to, if you'll bear with me, I've got to refer to my notes because my memory is not as good as it could be. My father and mother both, as I said before, came from somewhere in Poland, and my father's parents were David and Bessie Lipsey. And we always, my sisters and I had 3 sisters. My sisters and I always referred to them as Bubby and Zadie Pesci. And why, I don't know, except that, well, I guess Pesci, I guess, was my grandmother's Hebrew name. And of course, Bubby and Zadie, you know, that means grandmother and grandfather. And they were both very small people. They were very short, very quiet, very refined. My grandfather was a little guy, and he had white hair when I knew him, and it stood up on his head. He looked kind of like Albert Einstein, and like Einstein, he was a scholar. He was an amateur astronomer. And he used to try to teach me astronomy, and it was very difficult because he had a heavy accent, and I had a hard time understanding him when I was a little kid. But anyway, he did his best, and also he was one of my Malammeds. He was one of my Hebrew teachers when he was trying to prepare me for a bar mitzvah. And he was very learned in Hebrew history and language, and in the Hebrew language, and study of the Talmud, and he was his name was originally as near as I can determine, and I apologize to everybody because at that time I wasn't interested in the history of my parents, as so many kids weren't, and so I didn't ask any questions, and they never talked about it much. So I don't know what his name had been previous to being Lipschitz, but that was the name that he came to this country with. And my understanding was that, as near as I can determine, his name was something like Moeller. And he was about to be inducted into the Russian army, and he didn't want to be inducted into the Russian army, so he managed to get a passport with the name Lipschitz on it. And so he and his wife Bessie and my father and my father's sister wasn't born yet, and my father came to this country. My father was 2, and when my father was 21 years old, he took his father and down to the courthouse and convinced him to have his name changed from Lipschitz to Lipsey. And that's how we got the name Lipsey.
Very good.
Shirley, tell me about your siblings.
Well, I came out of a family of 11 kids, and I was right smack in the middle. I had 6 brothers and 4 sisters, and my brothers all stayed in Omaha after they were married, and my older sister and I stayed there, and my 3 younger sisters, Betty and Martha and Glory. Glory and Martha went to Kansas City, and Betty went to Dallas. And we still stayed very, very close. And then in 1975, Jimmy and I moved to Tucson. And as of right now, Jimmy and I are going to be married 60 years next month, in March. And we've just loved living here, and it's been wonderful, and we've made a lot of wonderful friends, and it's totally different than Omaha, although we loved living in Omaha. And we've lived longer here as a married couple than we did in Omaha. Yeah.
That's hard to believe.
Let's go back and talk about a typical day in the Lincoln household growing up.
Oh, the Lincoln household? All I know is there was a lot of noise. And I remember my mother being a marvelous cook, and that the house was open to everybody. And also something that I'm really proud of about Mother. And all of us girls learned this from her, that during the Depression, and I was just a little girl at the time, 6 or 7, we had a summer kitchen off of our kitchen in the house, and we lived in a very large house. And I can remember what we call the homeless today, of people who were so poor, and they would come to the house. I guess word got around that Mother was really a doll. And they would come around, and she had a table out there and chairs, and she would feed them, and she would give them food to take with them. And it's really funny, because today just a couple of days ago, my sisters and I were on a conference call. We do that a lot. And we were talking about the various things that we do with people who just don't have any means. And my little sister Betty, when she sees an article in the paper up in Phoenix, she'll call the paper and she'll find out how she can get in touch with a person who is really in a bad way. And she'll go meet them and visit with them, and she'll buy them whatever it is they need or give them food. And Martha's very much the same way. And Jimmy and I have been involved in a lot of stuff here in Tucson. And it's just that I really owe that all to my mother. And it's something that you just learn at a very early age.
Jimmy, what kind of life was there in the Lipsey household growing up?
Well, it was very different from Shirley's household as she described it and as I knew it. I had three older sisters. My youngest sister was 8 years older than I. That was Millie, and she married Sam Greenberg. And my middle sister, Lil, married Elmer Greenberg, and the two Greenbergs were not related. And my oldest sister, Janet, married Sam Stern. She was 13 years older than I. And it was a very close-knit family. We all got along very well. Everybody liked each other, and it was an idyllic existence. We lived on North 35th Street between Dodge and Davenport. And it was a wonderful life, and my sisters were all wonderful to me. My oldest sister was my surrogate mother. She used to take care of me all the time, and I have a lot of pictures of her, and
She's
the
a
pictures
doll.
of her
She was a
were,
doll.
yeah, she was always carrying me in her arms when I was an infant.
How did your parents meet, Jim?
I really don't know. I know that my father only went to school through the 5th grade, and then he went back to business college or business school, whatever they called it later, and he emerged with beautiful handwriting and with the kind of arithmetic that I could never approach. He could add columns of figures faster than I could do it with an adding machine. And he went into business. He started supporting his father when his father, as I said, was a scholar and was not much of a businessman. And I can remember my father's stories about going around. My father's father, somehow, and I don't know how he came into possession of them, but he came into possession of several rental properties in Omaha. And my father used to talk about how he would go in his horse and buggy. His father would sit in the buggy, and my father would go out and do whatever had to be done, collecting the rents or taking care of the properties, while his father sat in the buggy. And then my father got jobs also when he by the time he was 11 years old, he was working and contributing to the support of his father. And my grandfather, my father's father, and my father's mother moved to Los Angeles when I was young. I must have been in my about